Okay. Thanks for those of you who hung in with during that brief interruption. I'll turn it back to Chris. We're going to use the camera instead. And this will be edited and available as one concise piece after we have some time to do that, after the taping of and recording of this. We'll edit it. It'll be available as one piece that folks can reference in the future. Chris?
Great. Thank you. And let me get set up here. So when we lost transmission, I was talking about some of the motivating factors for getting started with LEAD. And what was really the driver of the discussion at that time was the level that was taking place for low-level drug crimes in Seattle. So we had a situation where we had large numbers of individuals who were being arrested and prosecuted for possession and sale of relatively small amounts of drugs, and some of whom were serving very lengthy jail sentences for that. So that in of itself was problematic, but especially more problematic for many folks here in Seattle was the demographic composition of those that were bearing the burden of arrest, prosecution, and incarceration. And in particular, it was the racial demographics that were going on. In a city where less than 8% of the population is African American, the vast majority of people, in some cases 65% of the arrests were of African American individuals. So studies were showing that Seattle had one of the highest rates of racial disparity in its drug arrests of any city in the United States. One study showed that a black drug deliverer was 33 times more likely to be arrested than a white person committing the same crime in Seattle. So this was something that was exceptionally problematic to members of the community. And so folks started responding to that. One of the responses was that starting in 2000, one of the local public defender agencies started a very defense of its clients who were being arrested and prosecuted for drug crimes. And basically, without going into a lot of legal terminology, which still stumbles me up, even though I work with it all the time, they'd be doing aggressive defense of clients on the basis of selective enforcement of drug laws. In other words, that they're being unequally enforced. And so this ended in several rounds of litigation that went on starting in 2000 and all the way through the 2000s. And it created a great deal of tension between the Seattle Police Department, the King County Prosecutor's Office, and community groups here in Seattle, where there was a lot of argument back and forth about how to avoid the racial disparity in drug arrest, and it created a lot of bad feelings on everyone's part at that point. It took up enormous amounts of time, energy, and money to do this. At the end of the rounds of litigation in 2005, the person who was then head of the West Precinct of Seattle, the captain of the West Precinct, said, you know, what would you actually have us do differently in this situation? And so that actually put the ball back in the court of the community members. What would be an answer to that question? How would we, the police department, enforce drug laws differently? And we started thinking about diversion. And we started thinking about what is it that we could do that if we could turn something that was usually a bad and sometimes a catastrophic outcome to something that was potentially good for the person that was being involved. What if we just sort of upended the whole outcome of arrest as it was currently going on in Seattle? And so we really started exploring what diversion programs looked like, how they took place, and how we're building one here in Seattle. Then in 2008, at the end of another round of litigation, the King County prosecutor asked a similar question. He said, are we going to keep fighting this out in court for eternity, or is there something that we can actually do to work together to try and come up with a better solution? And so I think a term of us have used in retrospect is that at that point we were at a point of mutual collective exhaustion. We had been fighting over this issue for years and years and realizing that the current status quo was not serving anyone's needs. The Seattle Police was charged with carrying out and enforcing drug laws. It was under tremendous amounts of community pressure to arrest more drug use. And the police department's response is, look, we are arresting a lot of people and we're getting criticized for the amount of arrests that we're making now. The prosecutors are facing severe budgetary cuts. They also, they have been sending people to jail for very lengthy periods of time, beginning in the 1980s, and it was having absolutely no impact on street-level drug markets. And community units were upset about open-air drug markets. So everyone was dissatisfied with the status quo at that point. And that laid the groundwork for talking about how could we do something differently. So at that point, some of the community members started pitching the idea of a post-arrest pre-booking diversion program. And basically everyone involved in the area at that point said, yes, that's a good idea. Let's go ahead and give it a try. So in 2009, we actually came up with the name Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion. And then in early 2010, we got consensus from all of the relevant local criminal justice and community and neighborhood players in Seattle that if we could come up with the funding for law enforcement assisted diversion, we would launch it on a pilot demonstration basis in Seattle's Belltown neighborhood. In 2011, we obtained enough funding to begin the program, and we started operations in Belltown in October of 2011. So that's a background of what LEAD is, why it came about, and how it ended up coming about. So let me just talk for a little bit about our current status and where we might head from here. So when we began LEAD, we knew that this was going to be something that we were going to have to work very hard to sell to other places. So we came into it eyes wide open, knowing that we were going to have to really fully and rigorously evaluate the program and prove that it was better than a system of arrest, prosecution, and incarceration. It was to operate for 2 full years and begin an evaluation in the 3rd year. And hopefully the results of that evaluation would be good enough that we could transition to public funding in the 3rd year. So as I mentioned before, we finished 2 years of operation in October of 2013. We are beginning an evaluation right now. We've done all sorts of qualitative level evaluation over the previous. We're beginning a quantitative outcome evaluation now. We hope to have results by the fall. But as I mentioned before, level of success, the Seattle City Council approved enough funding for LEAD to expand to cover all of downtown Seattle in 2014. So we're at least ahead of track on that level, and hopefully the evaluation results will be good enough that we can continue to expand LEAD, not just throughout Seattle, but throughout King County. And our goal here really is to make arrest the strategy of last resort for low-level drug crimes and commercial sex work in Seattle, King County. So LEAD has generated considerable amounts of interest in other jurisdictions. One of the other jurisdictions that was really interested, Santa Fe, New Mexico, where they have a very, very long-standing generations in Mexico. They were really interested in LEAD, and they had a delegation of Seattle folks come down to Santa Fe almost 2 years ago. And it generated enough interest among the department there and the city council that they approved funding for LEAD last summer, and they are beginning implementation right now. They probably will do their version sometime in the next few weeks. We have had visitors from California, Georgia, Illinois, Maine, Maryland, New Mexico, all the country have come here. Texas has come and will be coming in the next few weeks. We're going to have a delegation from China coming to visit Seattle in a couple of weeks, and we have on LEAD both nationally and internationally, including at the Office on Drugs and the International Harm Reduction Conference in Lithuania last summer. So with that, I think it up for some questions and some commentary, and we can take it from there, hopefully.
Great. And Chris, why don't we just share camera?
Yeah.
Having some technical difficulties earlier. So I think our first question is one that I had as we begin to collect all of the ones coming in into Twitter. The first I had was around the demographics of the people who are impacted by this project. You mentioned early on that most of the people who were arrested in Seattle were Black people. However, Black folks only make up 8% of the population of Seattle.
Correct.
So I'm wondering, is that the population that seems to be getting diverted, or are we seeing once again that only certain people are benefiting from this program? How are the demographics looking at?
That's a really good question and a good place to start, because one of our concerns when we did leave, when we started it, was, what if we end up in a situation where the demographics of the population that is being diverted is radically different from the demographics of the population that was previously being arrested? And to their credit, the Seattle Police Department has carried on diversions just as they were doing their previous level of law enforcement. So the demographics, and again, I have to state, we've been operating to date on a very small-scale pilot basis. So we only have 180 individuals that have been diverted to lead so far. But of those that have been diverted, about 60% are African Americans. So the population, the demographics of the population actually very closely mirror the demographics of those who were being diverted, who were being arrested without a diversion program.
Okay. And so I'm wondering also about those participants. How are they playing a role in the program design, development, decision making? How are those 180 people being captured as leaders and shaping this program?
So to date, not really very much, to be absolutely honest with you. We developed into LEAD when we started it, a peer education and a peer leadership development component. But because we were trying to do so many different things at the same time, some of which had really, quite frankly, never been done before, we realized that was biting off a little bit too much after several months of trying it. So we put it on pause for a little bit, and we're hoping to redevelop it as we go along. One of the interesting things, though, is that some of the participants are organically getting to that point. So, for example, we have a group of 4 or 5 participants who are in housing together, and they started developing their own house rules about what would be acceptable behavior and what wouldn't be acceptable. And they're doing a lot of mentoring of each other and sort of supporting each other in the program. So that's really nice to see. But that is one aspect that we realize is something that we want to work on much further.
Other questions here. We have one about just asking, what are the biggest challenges that you're facing?
Well, I think the biggest one is something I alluded to before, which is that there are a lot of systemic barriers that exist in the United States that are fairly unique. So, for example, when we were looking at diversion programs in other countries, one of the things that stood out was that other areas that had tried something similar to what we did all had single payer, everybody had health care. And so it was no added cost to the system to implement a diversion program because everybody that came into the program had care. They already had access to drug treatment. It didn't add any extra cost. In fact, it was pure savings. When we launched it, the Affordable Care Act had not come even close to taking effect yet. So even though the overwhelming majority of people that are diverted would be Medicaid eligible, we were paying for all of their drug treatment. We were paying for their health care. So now that the Affordable Care Act is taking place, we're hoping that a lot of the money that we have used to date we can spend on other things, like housing. Finding housing for folks that have been diverted is, in some cases, impossible unless we are able to buy our own building due to discrimination against people who have prior felony convictions. So that has been, getting over those systemic barriers has been really quite significant.
Okay. Well, I think that concludes our presentation today. Thank you so much for joining us. You can join our mailing list to receive the full video of the presentation today. You can like us on Facebook to receive more updates about upcoming webinars, and you can find us online at allianceforjustsociety.org for more information about the Cellblocks webinar series or the LEAD program in Seattle. And Chris, the website for more information on the LEAD program
is leadkingcounty.org. And there's a link there to send us an email if you have further questions or comments.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining, everyone.